He was born into a political family in Massachusetts. During the Second World War, he commanded PT boats in the Pacific. He was elected to the U.S. House and then the Senate. He wrote a Pulitzer Prize-winning book and won the Democratic presidential nomination. He won a close election against Vice President Richard Nixon. Much of his presidency was consumed with foreign policy concerns related to the Cold War. He authorized a failed attempt to overthrow the communist government of Cuba and sent more military advisors to Vietnam. America came close to nuclear war with the Cuban Missile Crisis. He established the Peace Corps, supported civil rights, and oversaw the continuation of the space program. But he was shot and killed in Dallas, Texas, in the third year of his presidency. He is our nation's 35th chief executive, John F. Kennedy. Let's take a look at a map of lower New England and some sites pertaining to John F. Kennedy. We begin in Brookline, Massachusetts, near Boston, in this general area. The house where Kennedy was born in 1917 is there. It is a National Historic Site, and you can tour the house. Now, the Kennedy compound is in Hyannisport, Massachusetts, on Cape Cod, down in this general area. The house, of course, is not open to the public, but there is a museum in Hyannis that you can check out. Another very important site is Newport, Rhode Island, and Hammersmith Farm, which is the childhood home of Kennedy's wife, Jacqueline Bouvier Kennedy. It's also the location of the Kennedys' wedding reception in 1953. They were married in a church in Newport, and the reception was held at Hammersmith Farm. Now, for a time, this site was open to the public for tours. Unfortunately, it is currently now a private residence and is not open to the public. In Boston, you can see the John F. Kennedy Presidential Library and Museum, and right next to it is the Edward M. Kennedy Institute for the United States Senate, which is very unique and provides an interactive experience in exploring the U.S. Senate, and it includes a replica of the U.S. Senate chamber. Let's look at another map. This is a map of Texas, and of course it was to Texas that Kennedy made a trip in November of 1963. In Dallas, you can see the site where Kennedy was assassinated. You can visit the 6th floor museum at the Texas Book Depository, and there's a nice museum there that tells not just about the assassination, but about Kennedy's life. And let's look at one other map. This, of course, is a map of the area around Washington, D.C., and right across the Potomac is Arlington National Cemetery. Kennedy is buried there, along with one other president, William Howard Taft, on land that once belonged to Robert E. Lee. Now let's take a look at some photographs of these locations. Let's take a look at some books in my collection relating to John F. Kennedy. There's quite a bit here. I'll try to go through it quickly. For a very brief biography of Kennedy, this book was published in 1988. It's by David Berner, and it's called John F. Kennedy and a New Generation. This was published in 1964. It's by the famous Time White House correspondent Hugh Sidey, and it's a good account of Kennedy's presidency. It's just called John F. Kennedy, President. This is a very good book covering Kennedy's early years. It's, I think, aptly titled JFK, Reckless Youth. It's by Nigel Hamilton. It was published in 1992. And it goes through Kennedy's childhood, his college years, his service in the Navy during World War II, up through his election to Congress in 1946. This is another good book published in 1996 by Edward Klein. It's All Too Human, the love story of Jack and Jackie Kennedy. And here's a book that was published in 1988 for the 25th anniversary of Kennedy's death. It's called The Kennedy Legacy, A Generation Later. And it has a lot of photographs of Kennedy from the 1960 campaign and from the White House. A very good book published in 2012, Listening In, The Secret White House Recordings of John F. Kennedy. You may or may not know that there were secret White House recordings of the Oval Office during the administrations of John F. Kennedy and Lyndon Johnson, as well as Richard Nixon. Most people know about that one. This contains the actual recordings. There's a CD that goes along with it, or you can read the transcripts of some conversations with a lot of influential people during the Kennedy years. So here's a really good book published in 2013 by Thurston Clarke. It's JFK's Last 100 Days, The Transformation of a Man and the Emergence of a Great President. And it covers the period from August of 1963 until Kennedy's assassination in November. And it shows him dealing with all of the crises that he dealt with during his presidency, with Cold War tensions, with civil rights, with the war escalating in Vietnam. And it's a good portrait of what was going on in that period. It's a week-by-week account. And certainly the author's take is that Kennedy had matured throughout his presidency and that he was becoming a great leader during the last year or so of his presidency. I have some books dealing with Kennedy's assassination. This is a book by Bill O'Reilly, part of the Killing series, Killing Kennedy, The End of Camelot. This book was published in 2012. A good straightforward account, like all of O'Reilly's books. It's very readable. This book also came out in 1988 at the time of the 25th anniversary of Kennedy's death. It's Reflections on JFK's Assassination, 250 Famous Americans Remember November 22nd, 1963. So they asked for statements from a lot of different famous people, politicians, actors, all kinds of people. And they published their reflections in the form of the letter that they submitted. So here's what it looks like. And they're reflecting on what they were doing on November 22nd, 1963, when they heard that Kennedy was shot in Dallas. This is a book published by the Associated Press in 1968 after the assassination of Senator Robert Kennedy, and it's called Triumph and Tragedy, The Story of the Kennedys. Another good book that was published in 1988, Let the Word Go Forth, The Speeches, Statements, and Writings of John F. Kennedy 1947 to 1963. It contains, as it says, many of Kennedy's speeches and other writings, some from before his presidency, but mostly during his presidency, and some reflections and introductions to each item. It includes the speech that Kennedy was to make at the Dallas Trade Mart on November 22nd, 1963. One last very interesting little booklet here. I had mentioned when we had the map up that Hammersmith Farm in Newport, Rhode Island, which had served as the summer White House, used to be open to the public for tours. Well, I have a booklet called Hammersmith Farm, Newport, a Summer White House, 1961 to 1963. My grandparents actually got this years ago when they were able to tour Hammersmith Farm. Unfortunately, I was never able to do it before it closed. But so it's really a treasure to have it. It has a lot of great photographs from the interior of Hammersmith Farm. Our next episode will take a look at our nation's 36th president, Lyndon B. Johnson.